Hi everyone, welcome back to The Negotiation. On today's show, we talk with Philip Beck, chairman at Dubeta, discussing lookalike data, managing bad PR, and capability mapping. What is your favorite Chinese brand and why?
My favorite brand is Xiaomi, the mobile phone handset, because when it launched in China, I think Lei Jun, the founder, had obviously read the book Lean Startup, and then, a spin-off came Lean Manufacturing. But when he launched the phone, he said to the Chinese public, I want to be able to give you a smartphone that has the same functionality as an Apple iPhone at 1/10 of the price. And I'm going to not launch one new version every year, but I'm going to keep iterating my product until it's the best. And that's exactly what he did.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Philip, welcome to the show. You and I are old friends. We have done multiple recordings before, and so thank you once again for jumping on with us.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Okay, so let's jump in. The first question I want to ask is a little bit open-ended. What is your China story? Because it's super interesting and relatively long, I think, for most people who have been in China. How long have you been there? So tell us that. And what has kept you busy and planted in China?
Sure. I've been here living and working here for 14 years, so since 2005, but actually came to do business here for the first time in 1995. And, my perceptions back then were bicycles everywhere because it was Beijing, and it was about as big as the second ring road, whereas now the population is much, much larger. But it all went back to when I was 8 years old, and my father brought me here to actually Guangzhou.
Oh, wow.
And that was just a real eye-opener for me as an 8-year-old. And I still have these memories of seeing people cycling down the street on their bicycle with 2 dead chickens hanging off the handlebars, and just thought, this is a crazy place compared to my homeland of Australia. But so since 2005, and initially that was to run the Publicis Group, which is a French-listed advertising agency group, and did that. And then 2009 decided to step away from the corporate world after 32 years of being in the corporate world and get into the startup world, because I think I'd always been a bit of a geek since I was a kid, building my crystal radio set and then using relays at the time to do the binary yes, no, or 1010. Mm-hmm. Got into the startup world. And I think that came from having started Australia's first digital media agency in 1995, and then China's first digital media agency in 2005 with Publicis. But since 2009, working with local Chinese tech startups in China as an angel investor. And then about 3 years ago, that 100% of my time started morphing more into now 50% advising and working with what I would call more traditional international brands that have operations in China or want to enter the China market, and how do they do that? And my focus that I bring to the table is, how do they digitize their operations in China? And importantly, how they use digital technology to reach potential consumers and then serve those consumers once they've acquired them.
And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But I have to ask you, what was digital marketing like in 2005?
Oh, it was less than 5% of a client's spend. And I remember when I set up CMX Digital with Publicis, a lot of all the markets sort of looking at me going, "What are you doing?" And then, if we sort of fast forward from 2005 to now, in China at least, all clients across China are now allocating at least 68%, but in most cases 75% of their entire consumer marketing budget to digital. So yeah, it's evolved incredibly quickly.
I can only imagine. From the models, the modems, the mediums, everything must have changed. Plus the technologies, the way that people interacted with brands, and we talked before the show about my tendency to want to go off script, and here's a perfect example. I mean, where were you focusing digital spending on in the 2005, 2006, 2007? It couldn't have been on as much as it would be on mobile today. Where was this 5% being spent?
Yeah, so it was desktop, and back then our approach to digital was more like offline. It's right. we sort of treated digital as like an online broadcast medium, and you got to think about Baidu and Weibo.
Back when digital was radio.
Yeah. So it was, the concept of being able to refine your targeting as you can now. Like you can be very granular in targeting who you want to serve up your ads. But, back then there wasn't the depth of data like we have now with the WeChat wallet and Alipay, because, they understand what you and I are doing, not only in the online world through their assets, but also what we're doing in the offline world with our digital wallet. So that sort of granularity of consumer data didn't exist back in 2005. So, in a lot of cases we were, taking guesses on, okay, well, we'll use Weibo for this target audience because of the content. It seems like that this would be an appropriate digital media for the client. But fast forward to 2019, I can, if I was like Luck and Coffee, the Chinese startup that's taken on Starbucks, they could go to an Alibaba or Tencent and say, I want to target females between the age of 22 and 26 that live in Beijing and who spend at least 20 RMB a day at a Starbucks store. Bang, I can serve up ads to that group and, try and switch them to Luck and Coffee. And there's, many examples of being really, really super targeted. Or if I use a word in the West, Facebook, they talk about building a lookalike audience so you can target new consumers. Well, the lookalike audience profiling in China is, at least 2 to 3 times stronger than what you can get on Facebook, which, it's strong, but Alibaba and Tencent, and to a lesser extent ByteDance with TikTok and Douyin, as masters at that. Yeah,
right. Let's run with that. I don't want to leave that. I find that super interesting, and it's not something that we talked about before the show. Lookalike data. It's not something that we've actually talked about on the show before, and I think it is it is fascinating. I don't have a very accurate, intelligent question to ask about.
That's that. Okay.
I want you to just tell me a little bit about you, because we know what that looks like in the US, and like you said with Facebook, but what is it? Why is it important? And how does it work? How does it live in China? How do you use it?
Sure. I'll use Coach, the American bag brand, as an example.
Right. Perfect.
So, years ago, they were one of the first brands to have an official WeChat account. And they understood that if I could get Todd to bind his mobile phone number to the official account, so, effectively you giving them agreement to have your mobile phone number, they could then, through the back end of Tencent, because they've got your mobile phone number now, they can see your real name, location, gender, device. And then if they were smart, which they were, at getting additional information from you, like your birthday, they could then start following what you were liking on their WeChat official account through, heat map technology. So they could go and they could see what you liked. They could see what you shared with your friends. And with that knowledge, they started building a profile of you. And they did that with all their followers. And so now they've got more than, 4 million followers on their official WeChat account. If that person goes on to the Tmall flagship store and buys something, it's the same mobile phone number. So that's another data point they collect. If you go into a store and buy something, the assistant is trained to ask you, you're following us on our WeChat account.
Yeah.
So they're capturing all these data points. If you were to go to, fly to New York, then when you land in New York, you've got a welcome message from Coach. So, because they know your geolocation. So this behavior by brands to capture consumer information is something that more than 65% of the brands in China are doing now. And so with this consumer profile data, they have this lookalike audience that they can then go to other platforms and say, I want to serve up ads to this sort of person. So their ability to be able to target is just getting better and better and better.
So they just really, really understand an entire breadth of their customer that they can now copy paste into other platforms. You gather it from one and then you deploy that to many and say, find me these same people on your platform and your platform and your platform.
Yep.
So a little bit about when you land in New York, Coach sends you a welcome message. We know that doesn't necessarily fly with North Americans. They would be freaked out and creeped out. And, that started way back with the whole, Target advertising to the pregnant teen whose father found out and freaked out. And then, Target knew that his daughter was pregnant before he did. And it was just through her behaviors and shopping behaviors. So, and the stories have been run rampant. There was the Great Hack, and we talk about the Cambridge Analytica, stuff like this. I want to ask you about what your feeling is on the culture of China as the consumer and how they've adapted and adopted. And would they have the same reaction to the same kind of things, or are they just much more okay with it?
I think they're just much more okay with it. And, like every consumer around the world, if you were to take advantage of, because if I use the Coach example or any other brand, when I agree to give you my mobile phone number, that's my conscious decision to do that. I can at any point delete if you were to do the wrong thing. And in China, you've got to understand that Chinese consumers are merciless when it comes to a brand doing the wrong thing. And I'll use Costco as an example. It opened with great fanfare in Shanghai last week, and lots of people in the store and blah, 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 and having to do crowd control. And this week they're doing crowd control with people demanding refunds, all because of some claims that were made by Costco when they launched about their annual membership program that a lot of Chinese consumers sort of feel is not so true. So there's a big backlash. So, when foreigners sort of freak out about data privacy, I think they have this feeling that, it's Big Brother in China, but, I'm using my digital wallet to pay for things through Alipay or WeChat Pay. I know that they can track my purchasing behavior. I think everyone in China gets that. But what overrides, I think some of the talk in the West, and I think this will occur in the West as time goes by, is the word convenience. It's just so convenient to be able to use my smartphone for almost everything in China. Payments, taking the subway, getting on the bus, I'm just using my smartphone.
Yeah.
And sure,
for sure,
someone knows all about that. But, my attitude is, and this is, I can't really talk for America or Canada, but, in my own homeland of Australia, I know that they're tracking Australians and what they're doing as part of their assessment of what any terrorist threat might be.
Yeah.
So I think we're sort of fooling ourselves if we think that any government around the world is not doing some tracking of some sort. And what I think will eventually come to the fore around the world is the deployment of technology, smartphones just makes life incredibly convenient for people, and it always does my head in. And, I was in the US a couple of weeks ago when I think, because in China I just carry my mobile phone with me. That's all I need. And then, in the US it's going, I've got to have cash. I've got to have credit cards.
Yeah. I went through the same reverse culture shock with when I came back as well. I just this having to have cash thing. I mean, for me, the angst over having to actually go to an ATM. And if it's not my own banks, and then being hit with a $2 or $3 fee to just like the frustration, it's not normal. I think, oh my gosh, this is totally normal for people over here, but for me, it's frustrating me intensely.
Yeah. Well, I just completed it was just a little challenge I gave myself 12 months ago, but I set myself up this challenge of not using any cash in China for 12 months. And it was so easy. I still have the 860 RMB, which I carried in my pocket every day and didn't touch it.
Yeah, I'm surprised it wasn't 880. It should have been for good luck. I wanted to ask one more thing about talking about managing backlash, because you mentioned the Costco thing, and boy, I tell you, once that train gets rolling, as far as a backlash, there's one thing about China is that stuff can go viral, and they will, as a country, absolutely ostracize you as a brand. And so when entering China and the companies that you advise, do you recommend that at least something is built in as far as a PR management fallback option, or at least budget for that is put in play?
Definitely, you've got to have a budget for, we use the word here, PR crisis, but you have to have a PR crisis budget to deal with that. But at the same time, have it. But really what I encourage foreign companies to do is to just be sensitive to how you promote yourself in China. Don't, like Versace, don't make stupid mistakes of calling Hong Kong or Taiwan a separate country. It's Greater China.
Right.
On your website. Yeah. Don't do that. They released T-shirts recently that had that like a month ago, and then had to recall them, obviously. Dolce and Gabbana, classic examples. So, just being sensitive to how you do business in China and how you promote your brand. So for that to happen, they've just got to make sure they've got people on board, or they use an agency that understands the Chinese culture, understands the Chinese sensitivities. Otherwise, you're going to have millions of people that will overnight make comments about your brand and destroy it. And Procter & Gamble years ago had to exit one of their brands from the Chinese market because they just couldn't recover.
Talking to your work, or speaking to the work that you do now, and everybody has a intercompany liaison, or the people that you actually dialogue with on a regular basis. How do you work with them, and how do you actually enable them so that the entire project is effective, but that they are able to take what you know? Because we know that you're delivering to them a lot of novel and new and probably difficult to chew on advice and steps and budget that they then need to take back up the chain within their own company to get approval or some such. How do you work with them, enable them? What do you work on with them so that the entire operation is more successful and smoother?
Normally what I try and do is to understand what does their board understand about China at the moment. And 90% of the time, I find that their understanding is incredibly limited because it might end up being one paragraph in a board report or maybe a 15-minute discussion and they don't really understand where China is going to be in the next 10 to 20 years. So first clarify what's their level of understanding. 90% of the time it's incredibly small. So then what I normally demand is that I have a conversation with the board. And I don't talk about budgets or anything like that. I really take them through, it's a Philip Beck intro of this is China and where it's heading. And understand that, by 2030, if you're a global brand, more than half your entire global revenue is going to be coming from China and from Chinese consumers. And that's, more and more clients are starting to understand that. It scares them, but, it's then saying, so what are you doing as a business to, one, understand China, two, understand how do you take your existing product and adapt it if you have to with Chinese characteristics. But it's more getting their mind around China, giving them an understanding and trying to understand what is their risk appetite for China. And, there's one company, I can't say their name, but 4 years ago, and they've been here for like 18 years, but they've really been through a lot. So the risk appetite hasn't been that great, but their understanding also, even though they've been here for such a long time, has not been great. But it's taken them 4 years now through some education, getting them brought out here to China at least every 6 months and not just going to tier one cities, but other cities, and to really understand China or get a better understanding of China. And, last year, they finally made the decision to accelerate the growth of their business by, more than 5 times, because now they understand better what the risk is, what they need to do, and they're going to go do it. So that's normally where I start. It's an education and simple things like by 2050, China's economy will be greater than America plus Europe put together. And India's economy, I know we're talking about China, but India will be greater than the European Union. So you've got 65% of a brand's global revenue will be coming from Asia Pacific, but most importantly, India and China. So if a global brand doesn't get this market right, it's going to fail.
Let me ask you, and this is, I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna edit this out. Did you mention capability mapping?
Yes.
Okay. I got lost in listening to you, and then I forgot if you actually had mentioned that word.
Oh no, I don't think I did cover that. Capability
okay,
mapping.
I'm just gonna ask you that right now.
Yep.
You mentioned when we were chatting before the show something called capability mapping. Talk to me a little bit about and tell our listeners about what that is.
So that's looking at, okay, once we've agreed what the strategy is for China, then it's looking at the people in the business in China and doing some capability mapping on, do they have the core competencies to be able to deliver against this plan? If they don't, what are the gaps? And then how do we close those gaps? And that's through, I call it a 70-20-10 plan, where 70% of the effort's going to come from the employee themselves and 20% from feedback from peers, direct line manager and global reporting lines, and then 10% from actually, formal training. But we do that capability mapping, do a gap assessment, and sometimes, unfortunately, there has to be the difficult conversation of how do we manage someone out of the business because they're just not going to be appropriate for what is needed moving forward, particularly when some companies really do need to accelerate the digitization of their business from their supply chain through to customer acquisition and customer service afterwards, and digital marketing and e-commerce. So,
okay,
yeah, that's the capability mapping exercise that we go through.
I like it, and it's definitely important. Now that we're running towards the end of the show, and there's a few things that I do want to cover, and so we're going to make these a little more quick fire. Tell our listeners, what is guanxi, and is it important and or necessary for companies?
In other markets, you'd call it networking. So just like, if I know Todd and I think he might be able to help me with something, I'll give you a call and say, hey, Todd, I've got this challenge. It's the same in China. People think there's a lot more attached to it, but at the end of the day, it's just using your network of contacts and friends to help you get things done.
Yeah, there could be even more. I mean, it is it's relationships, but it's funny because it's also a debits and credit system.
There is okay. Well, like you've helped me. Yeah, there is that, sense of obligation.
There is.
Yes.
There is.
Yes.
It's funny. I asked somebody for help with something, and once a Chinese person, they turned me down. I said, why? And he said, well, because his son is getting married. I said, so what? And he said, well, then I'll get invited to the wedding. And I was like, okay, still, like, what? I don't get it. He's like, if I have to go to the wedding, that means I have to give a red envelope, and if you give a red envelope, that means you're giving them cash. And so he didn't want to get an invite to the wedding because he didn't want to have to give the son who was getting married cash. So he didn't want to do the favor for me because he would owe the person that he asked. So it was like a hilarious kind of way of going about it. I just thought this only in China with that. Actually, I had to follow that trail of breadcrumbs. It was pretty amazing. You spoke of the Philip Beck Future of China that you have to deliverance that you have to give to your clients. Just real quick, what are some of the trends that you're seeing out there?
So the first one is obviously the growth in online ad spend, which is now, let's say, 75% of total ad spend. The second one is that e-commerce as a channel to market for most brands will be at least 20% of their sales by 2020, and that will continue to grow.
In China?
In China. So, got some brands who are doing 30% of their total China sales through online commerce, whether that's through Tmall, WeChat, Jingdong, whatever the platform is. So you've got to have an e-commerce presence. Obviously, mobile in China is the place to be. If you don't have a mobile presence or not optimized for mobile, then again, you're going to die. The other thing, and the most important thing of all, and it's not a trend, it's just a basic fact, is that in China, the speed of doing business is 7 times quicker than the West. So I always use this analogy of 7 years equals 1 in China.
It's like dog years.
So, yeah. So if you don't move quickly, if you don't make decisions quickly, if your company organizational structure is incredibly centralized or central command and control, that's just not going to work in China. You've got to figure out a way that you can deploy decision making and build frameworks around mitigating risk that allow your people in China to make decisions quickly and move quickly, because if they don't, their competition is going to eat them. And again, I'll use Luck and Coffee as an example of a startup that's come out of nowhere to challenge Starbucks. So
sure. Well, I guess we better get this podcast out within the next 7 weeks, so we're going to have to completely redo it.
Completely change it.
I know. Yeah. It's all new information. So second last thing, just a couple of brands that you fancy. I know I asked you off the top of the show, what is your favorite your Chinese brand? But what are a couple of brands, international or foreign brands, that are doing China correctly versus some that aren't?
I'll go back to, KFC and Volkswagen. They're two well-known international brands that entered the China market, and I'll call it entered the China market with Chinese characteristics. KFC, where, to start with, they were selling yellow chicken, not white chicken, because that's what Chinese people ate at the time. And there was a Chinese person that had the courage to say to a senior employee at KFC, if we launch with white chicken, I think we'll fail. So just little changes like that, which don't affect the brand, but just make it incredibly acceptable to the local consumer.
Yeah.
Versus someone like McDonald's and to some extent General Motors that came in with this is how we do it in America, so this is how we'll do it in China. And that's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think overcoming that, what has been traditionally a very successful expansion model of the standardization of wherever you go in the world, a Big Mac tastes like a Big Mac, and maybe China is the one place in the world, and I'm sure there's going to be more where people aren't. It doesn't work the same. Again, no intelligent way to say that. Just it's not the go-to market entry strategy. You should actually adapt and you should localize.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd just like to add is when you've got brands in China being able to collect a lot of consumer information and also what consumers like and don't like, if you are doing very good social listening, you can then start to understand, okay, most of our portfolio has black when really it seems like that a lot of our consumers want red. We need to deliver that if we deliver that to them, then we'll make some sales. And Shiseido, the cosmetic company, is a classic example of a brand that has, has through an alliance with Alibaba, it's getting sort of real-time feedback on what consumers are looking for, and then building a product and delivering it to them, albeit in a trial basis, and then going, that actually did work, and then getting the factory in Japan to actually make it in volume.
Yeah.
So this sort of on-demand understanding of what consumers like and don't like, and then feeding it into your production. That you've got to be nimble and agile, and that's just what you've got to be in China across everything.
Last question. Give our listeners your number one piece of advice about doing business in China.
I'll go back to my 7 years equals 1. If you don't move quickly, then you'll get eaten by the competition.
Excellent. Philip, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on the show, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks very much, Todd. Thank you.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。